Welcome to the first episode of Westeros.org's video reviews for Season 6 of Game of Thrones, The Red Woman. Now, things will be quite a bit different this year. As you all know, at the end of the 5th season, we were both quite uncertain as to whether we would be watching Season 6 because of the fact that, well, we weren't happy with Season 5 and because it was going to be going into spoiler territory if The Winds of Winter wasn't out. We held out for a bit, waiting to see if The Winds of Winter was going to come out, or if, we were going to get a look at a manuscript or something. That hasn't happened, but what has happened is that I'm translating the show again this year. I was asked to work on it, and I do feel that whatever I feel about the show, I like George's work to be represented as well as possible, and that includes having a translation that is accurate when it comes to the Westeros-specific terminology and things like that. But, as you can see, I am sitting here alone, and this is how the video reviews will be going this year. I am doing them myself because Elio is not watching. I'm biting the bullet for both of us, so to speak. That means that the format will change a bit. I'm just going to basically be doing a commentary on sort of section by section of the story. I won't be doing any highs and lows. And I also won't be doing the background material that we've been doing previous seasons. Instead, Elio and I will be doing a second video together. We hope to manage to do this most of the weeks, where we discuss some situation in the books that sort of is relevant to the episode in question, but discussed purely from the perspective of the books. So that will sort of take the place of the background material. And with that, I hope you've got some idea of what to expect as I go into the first review. This first episode begins and ends at the Wall, which is not surprising considering that's where we ended last year. And that reminds me that in the intro here, I was going to bring something up for the book readers who are still watching and perhaps with some trepidation about spoilers. There are obviously going to be spoilers, and in particular, I wanted to bring up those that kind of resolve mysteries and or possibly resolve mysteries or long-held theories and things like that, because, people may die who eventually will die in the books, but they might die in completely different ways, and all those things are going to be very difficult to label as spoiler or not spoiler. But there is a scene at the end of this episode, which if you're, worried about being spoiled when it comes to mysteries and theories, if you haven't already watched it, you might want to give that one a skip. Anyway, we start off at the Wall, and, book purists such as myself get a reason to grumble at the very start, because we hear a wolf howling mournfully as we pan in on Jon's dead body. It's a ghost, and yes, they've already established that he's not silent on the show, so I know it's kind of late to complain about it again. But it's kind of sad that they made it the point of the scene. He really can't express his feelings like that. So anyway, Jon appears to be very dead, and, just as they've said, at least for now. And Melisandre, for example, is very distressed about this. She talks about how she saw him in the flames and fighting at Winterfell. And so clearly she's starting to be very dubious about her abilities. And this is probably setting up something, as we see how the rest of the episode goes. So this is setting up something with her for the future. Other than that, the watch scenes, Thorne arguing to the watch that what he did was necessary, it plays out pretty well. Owen Teale is a good actor, and he does a good job as Alistair Thorne, so can't really complain about those scenes. The Davos Ed interactions, they're okay as well. I think it's nice to see more of Ed in particular, And then when we cut back at the end then to the Wall, when, they're getting an ultimatum from Thorne now, the men who've barricaded themselves with Jon's body rather. They're getting an ultimatum, and they don't want to accept it, they don't want to trust him, even though, he's offering that they're going to release Ghost north of the Wall where he belongs. Yeah, good luck, just releasing the direwolf who's upset that you stabbed his, his bond mate owner multiple times. I'm not sure he's gonna go along with that idea, but let's just say they're gonna try. Um, it works out pretty well, and there is admittedly a funny line in that episode. Again, they're making a bit more of Ed. He's gone at the time. He's gone off. So that he had an idea about something. He's going to try and arrange something, and one of the men says, Ed is our only hope, and somebody else chimes in, well, that's a sorry day when Ed is our only hope. And I think most book readers can sign off on that one, that if, Dolorous Ed was the only hope the watch had, it might be time to start packing it in. But Davos says that, there's also Melisandre, and they're kind of wondering, what's one redhead gonna do against all these men, and he's ominously saying, you haven't seen her do what I've seen her do. And then we cut to this final spoilerish scene, which is Melisandre alone in her room, in front of a mirror. She's taking off her clothes, and then she takes off that choker that she never takes off with the ruby. And she looks at her reflection again, and she's old. Is this how it is? Is this an illusion, a glamour? She put a glamour in the bracelet that she gave to Mance Rayder when he was going to appear as Rattleshirt. He flickered occasionally, and then Jon could see that there was something not quite right. But obviously, if that is her glamour, she's held it for many, many years. It might very well be much steadier, much more difficult to see through. I've never quite been fully on board with this theory myself. I've always thought that it's a matter of her life force being stored in that ruby. It's clear that it did something when she was being poisoned, that it sort of worked to cleanse it, or the magic worked at something. But it does seem to strengthen the idea that maybe she is indeed glamoured to hide her true age, because it's quite clear that yes, she is much older than she pretends to be. But whether she actually looks like a very, very old hag, I'm still leaving some room for it not being the case. But certainly I think this is one of the cases where they're showing something that we will see something similar like this in the books in the future. The second location that gets featured in this first episode is Winterfell, where we get a nice little family gathering of the Boltons. Well, it starts out with Ramsay mourning the dead Miranda and being very sad about their, wonderful life as killers together. I have a bit of a hard time swallowing this, true love thing that apparently went on between Ramsay and his little psychopath. Yeah, maybe, they obviously wanted to play up some sort of cool, natural born killers thing or whatever, but it just feels weird. It has to do with their whole fascination with Ramsay, I think, and just wanting to do more with him, flesh him out in a way that isn't really fleshed out. He's just more of a weird psychopath caricature, but still they wanted to have more to work with. The fact that he, after being all sentimental about Miranda, still decides to feed her to the dogs, I suppose, is the one bit that does ring true to Ramsay in that scene. And then Ramsay with his father, getting reprimanded for having, so thinks he won the fight. Well, he won the fight against Stannis, but he's lost Sansa, he's lost Theon, and Roose is kind of gloating a bit now about, oh, you lost your chance at an heir, and my oh my, the maesters are saying that Walda's carrying a boy, and cue Ramsay looking very troubled, and yeah, I'm not sure that's gonna go so well for Walda. It's just my feeling from the way he looks, but it's not exactly subtle, but then again, Ramsay isn't exactly subtle. So, not really sure what to make of the continued fascination with him, but whatever. And then the other scene in or near Winterfell is that we catch up with Theon and Sansa fleeing, and despite having jumped off the walls of Winterfell last season and being prepared to die rather than staying with Ramsay, an icy river is too much for Sansa. Yes, it's obviously very cold and unpleasant, but maybe they should have actually had her at least, being prepared to go across and actually having to be the one persuading Theon to go across at this stage. But no, it's still Theon dragging Sansa along here and saying, we have to, what the dogs will do to a person is much worse. And then the dogs catch up and Theon, is going forward to be the brave one, sacrifice himself, which he doesn't get around to doing because Brienne and Pod show up and save the day, slaughtering a bunch of people. Brienne is very good at mindlessly slaughtering people on the show, and not so good at being the Brienne of the books, but yeah. The scene between Brienne and Sansa, echoing when Brienne is swearing her oath of fealty to Catelyn, is a nice touch. I find it perhaps, again, that they're moving a little back and forth with Sansa. She's kind of taking that responsibility and being very mature and in that situation. Maybe this is supposed to signify a bit of a turning point for her, getting the support of Brienne and having finally been rescued from this situation. It's okay. It's it's not super terrible. It's not something that I'm jumping for joy over. But having the oath brought up again, yeah, that's a nice touch. Then we go down south and we catch up with the good folks in King's Landing, starting with Larry and Carol, Jaime and Cersei, that is. They're meeting after, Jaime has brought Myrcella's body. As you remember, she kind of went last season after they had a tender moment talking about how Jaime was in fact her father, and of course she had always known and she understood, and it was all very sweet, and then she died. And now we get to see Jaime and Cersei, or not Cersei as it has been for quite a while, and not Jaime as it's increasingly becoming, talking about death and their mother, and then Cersei's being ever so weepy about what a good girl Myrcella was, and how it was so strange that she could give birth to a child like that, and maybe it meant she wasn't a total monster. Cersei, with such insight into herself, calling herself a monster. I think that might be going off even further off the deep end as far as, not having anything to do with book Cersei, but, she's such a poor woman. She's such a sympathetic woman. You really just want to hug her and squeeze her, right? Because she's so sad about her daughter now, which is fine, but it shouldn't be expressed in that particular way. And Jaime and Cersei's relationship has been a roller coaster that has gone off the rails and spinning out into space or something like that, because there's just there's no consistency in it. And any sort of break between the characters, as has happened in the books, they seem completely unwilling to do that. It's always coming back to, it's us against everyone else, and that's clearly how they want to have it. This is going to be, the Lannister twins together again. The second scene in King's Landing is one of those lovely dungeons of the faith where we're seeing Septa Unella reading to Margaery from the Seven-Pointed Star, and then we have the High Sparrow coming in and sending her off, and seems to be doing a bit of a good cop, bad cop routine with Margaery, and being much more sympathetic than the evil Septa, who's just sternly reading and reading all the time. And it's a pretty minor scene, and I think it's mostly there just to show that they haven't forgotten entirely about the Tyrells in this first episode, and I guess as a reminder that, hey, the faith is still in play and are going to be problematic. And then we move yet further south to Dorne, or Bizarro World, as I would like to call it for this review, because things do get bizarre indeed in Dorne. We have this little conversation between Arya and Dorne, talking about Oberyn and, being all sentimental and thoughtful, and Taine's trailing along behind, and so is Arya Hota. And then a maester comes in, Princess Myrcella, and he's giving a message to Doran. And, well, Doran realizes what happened, kind of starts looking at Arya and his niece, and he does not realize what's going to happen next, however, and neither did most of the viewers, I bet. There's going to be bloody murder. So Arya stabs Doran, Taini stabs Arya, and then throws a knife after the maester as he runs off. And then it's Arya gloating about how, weak men aren't going to rule Dorne anymore. And when Doran, mentions my son, and she says Trystane is weak too, and apparently at this point, or maybe a little bit earlier, time is so different in Game of Thrones Westeros. Obara and Nym have teleported to King's Landing, where they murder Trystane, who is still sitting in his room on the ship docked outside of King's Landing. How this is supposed to work with, time-wise, let's not touch that too much. Jaime arrived in this episode with Myrcella's body. The message arrived from King's Landing, telling them that Myrcella is dead, and Obara and Nym got to King's Landing to kill Trystane, all in, very short succession, or no sense of what sort of time passed or anything. But the time is really the smallest problem. Even this is probably one of the worst acts of teleportation on the show so far, it is still the least problematic thing about this situation. We can start to look at, Arya again. We saw last season that apparently she was very much more vengeful than her book counterpart. Now she's apparently also happy to be a kinslayer, or at least her daughter is very happy to be a kinslayer. And the fact that, her deceased beloved Oberyn clearly loved his brother is not something that bothers her when she stabs Doran and decides to apparently take over Dorne. Yes, take over Dorne. And, none of the guards that actually arrested the Sand Snakes not that long ago, again, we don't know how long ago, but apparently they have all been turned to her way of seeing things. It's just that the whole of Dorne hates Doran and, think poorly of him. And obviously, yes, there are these sentiments in the books that, they wish he would be, seeking vengeance for Elia and for Oberyn and all these things. But the fact that none of the household guards, none of the guards in the palace would be at all loyal to their prince when they were a few weeks ago is a tiny bit hard to swallow. The idea that Arya thinks that she and her daughters are now going to run Dorne, apparently, is even harder to swallow. Unless, of course, in, the Westeros of the show, there are no other noble houses in Dorne. Or they all, just absolutely hate the Martells, but are perfectly fine letting someone who was, not even Oberyn's wife. Yes, they, regard paramours very well in Dorne, but still they weren't married. She's not a Martell, even, by marriage. Her daughters are Sands, not Martells. And they're just going to say, okay, yeah, we were unhappy with the Martells, so good on you for murdering Doran and taking over. We're just going to be sitting over here, minding our own businesses. You do whatever you want with Dorne. It's just insane. This is one of the biggest insanities that the show has perpetrated so far. And it's actually quite amazing that I'm this calm, but maybe doing this all on my own instead of having to, having someone to react with means that, I'm not going completely, off my rockers here. But it's insane. It's completely crazy. Clearly, I don't know what they were thinking. They wanted to have Dorne in last season, so they found some way of shoehorning it in by sending Jaime down and, Jaime and Bronn, having them there to be able to justify having Dorne. And then they basically decide that, I don't think we like that Dornish thing after all. Let's kind of kill it off in the bud, sort of. Because what are they going to do? Are they going to do more with Ilaria and her daughters? A bit, I suppose, but it doesn't seem like there's that much more to do. Maybe they'll sit around there waiting for Dany to invade, because obviously, no weak men are going to rule Dorne anymore. It's all going to be strong, murderers, kinslaying women from now on. They could even have done it like a tiny bit more acceptable if they had at least last year thought to hold on to Bronn in Dorne. Like, kept him as a hostage as they sent Jaime and Trystane and Myrcella back to King's Landing. Then they could have claimed that, he escaped and murdered the prince and murdered Dario Hota and murdered the maester or whatever, and then they kill him and make an example of him, and then they have yet more reasons for the Dornish to, be angry with the Lannisters and the rest of Westeros. But this seems to be a clear evidence that they did not plan this at all last season. They had not decided what they were going to be doing, but clearly when they said that this was going to be the most shocking season yet, they decided that a nice little bloodbath is a good way to start the season off, and, I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to be seeing more of these sort of prunings of the storyline by simple, wild mayhem and murder when it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I mean, Dorne is completely irredeemable, and I really, really wish they had never gotten anywhere near it on the show. So, across the sea to Essos we go, and to Meereen, where we've got the new buddy couple of Varys and Tyrion, walking the streets like ordinary men, checking out what Meereen is thinking about things. And I think, they obviously love the idea of having Conleth Hill and Peter Dinklage together and quipping back and forth and having fun again. I'm not quite so enthused by this idea. Varys I can still somewhat stand. Dinklage, not so much. There's supposed to be a funny scene here when Tyrion is trying to give money to a woman and a child, and his poor Valyrian makes her think she wants to pay to eat her baby. Played for laughs, as most things with Tyrion are these days, and it's a setup scene for the situation in Meereen, kind of recapping where things are, what's been happening. The slaves are, the Sons of the Harpy are causing problems after Dany flew off on Drogon. The freed slaves are worried that she's not going to return. Some of them are being resentful. And they're also setting up here, the Red Priestess preaching to the freed slaves and talking about how they should be taking up arms for themselves now that Daenerys isn't there to do it for them. Clearly foreshadowing things that are going to happen with, the R'hllorian religion and what that's going to lead to for Meereen in the future. And then the scene finishes on the fleet being burned. It's like, uh-oh, guess we're not sailing to Westeros anytime soon. And this again feels like something that they should have set up last season, as, the Sons of the Harpy were starting to become problematic. Now we kind of already know for this season that they have the Ironborn plot going. So for those who are not familiar with the books and, just the TV viewers, if they think a couple of steps ahead, it shouldn't be too hard to figure out that there's going to be new ships. So it really isn't that much of a bother this season. So it feels like a very late setup to have. It's not, nothing terribly offensive, at least coming after the Dornish scene, but I'm not too thrilled to be seeing the Varys and Tyrion show. And then we continue in Essos, now out on the Dothraki Sea, and this is actually the new buddy couple number 2, Daario and Jorah, searching for Dany. And while they're doing so, they're, having a bit of banter back and forth, obviously with a bit of an edge to it, as, Daario is pointing out that, poor Jorah and your unrequited love. And there is a nice line here that seems to feel like it fits. It's when Daario tells Jorah that, sometimes I look at you and see that, you're me when I grow old. And Jorah gruffly points out, if you grow old. And Daario has to concede that, if I grow old. And, that catches the whole mercenary aspect of it. And that's not bad at all. But unfortunately, this scene finishes on them finding the One Ring. No, not the one that Frodo threw into Mount Doom. The one that Daenerys, oh so cleverly, as David Benioff and Dan Weiss expressed it on some commentary, dropped when she was being surrounded by the Dothraki last season. Yes, they found the needle in the haystack, or the ring on the Dothraki Sea, and they see the tracks around, and they know that the Dothraki have her. And if it wasn't for, the ring, they could have set up any other way of them finding traces of Dany, but finding that ring out in the grass on the Dothraki Sea is really an unnecessary silliness for them to have engaged in. So the next scene is Dany among the Dothraki, and of course we get some crude banter from the Dothraki as they're marching her off to present her to their call about whether the carpet is matching the drapes, and how the one guy had only had a woman with white hair when he fucked the other's grandmother. Typical Dothraki chatting up a woman and things like that. They get to the call, and they put a bit of salt in our wounds about the whole thing about Dany not having her proper purple eyes. Yeah, I'm not going to demand those. Contacts are unpleasant for actors and whatever, but did they have to have the call's wife say, blue-eyed women are witches, it is known. Anyway, I guess they thought that was funny or something, and we get a bit of funny Conan-esque banter among the men as they talk about seeing Dany naked for the first time, which is apparently one of the 5 best things in life for a call. Dany herself, of course, tries to introduce herself very grandly with all her titles and demand that she be taken back to Meereen, where she'll give them a bunch of horses and all these things. I don't know if that's the sort of thing she'd really do in that situation. She knows the Dothraki. She spent a fair amount of time among them. She's, if they don't recognize who she is, aka Drogo's widow, then she's a nobody, and introducing herself as, I'm the mother of dragons and, you better obey me. She knows that that's not going to gain any foothold with the call, and that's exactly what happens. So, but it's just silly to have her be that stupid about it. And then, of course, when she does reveal that she's Drogo's widow, they say, you should be with a Dosh Colleen, and she's looking very troubled about that. And again, it's not something that Dany would have forgotten. She'd know that that's the sort of thing that would, if she ended up in the hands of the Dothraki, if they don't murder and rape her, they are going to put her with the Dosh Colleen. If they're respecting that she is Drogo's widow, they're going to put her with the Dosh Colleen. They're not going to respect all those titles that she's gathered along the way. And, it feels like a strange way of playing it, but then again, they've always had very odd ideas about when Dany's supposed to be imperious and when she isn't. The final location that we visit in this episode, well, before we go back to the wall for the final scene, it is Braavos, and this is basically catching up with Arya and seeing what blind Arya is up to now that she doesn't have any eyes, can't see anyway, and she's sitting out in the streets begging. So, this is obviously taking from those earlier chapters in Braavos where Arya is begging, but she wasn't blind at the time, so they've kind of conflated it. But there's actually, I think this is like the tiniest bit of actual book material that ends up being used in this episode. And basically the waif shows up to pester her while she's begging and initiates a fight with her. And so clearly this is continued training, training her senses and pushing her, to try and give up her pretense at being no one. And not too much to say about it. It's clearly just sort of establishing where we left Arya and sort of where we're going to continue with her for this season. And those are all the scenes for this episode. So how to rate this episode? Well, let's go with eye rolls. I think I counted out about 10 of them, plus an infinite number for Dorne, because, there aren't enough eye rolls in the world to deal with what they're doing there. And I really hope that I won't see too much more of Dorne this season, because I'm not sure that my eyes are going to stay in their sockets if that's the case. It's, on the whole, it's a fairly typical first episode in that it has problems with having to catch up with everyone and establish things, and it doesn't really make for a strong episode. And then they try to make it strong by adding in some shocking moments. We have the Melisandre reveal at the very end, and of course we have the murder and mayhem in Dorne. The less that is said about that, the better, really. But it feels like they're going to the same well, or wells in this case, a lot of the time when it comes to setting up episodes. When they feel that they need some reliable ingredients, they go for a bit of bloodbath, a bit of Tyrion banter, or, Tyrion and Varys banter, even better. It becomes very cliched within the story itself, that they're using these elements because they're reliable, and sort of they know that, oh, these are going to be crowd pleasers, and they don't really do much to contribute to the story, to the understanding of the characters, to, the overall feel of the world, or anything like that. I felt like it was a rather empty episode for the most part. And not too much good to say about it. There were some inoffensive scenes. There were a few lines that felt like they actually belonged in the world of Westeros, and that's about it. In terms of spoilers for the books, I would say that most of this episode really does move into beyond the book's territory. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be the case with all the storylines this year. Some of them may pull elements still from A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons for those characters that have elements left. This one, it's hard to say how much it exactly mirrors what's going to happen in the books. I mean, I doubt anything is particularly exact, to be honest. The follow-up on the wall, there's going to be some similar things happening, most likely. King's Landing is in a radically different situation, just because the fact that we have Jaime with Cersei. Cersei, after her walk of shame, is nothing like the Cersei after the walk of shame in the books, who seems to have decided that being subtle is actually a nice idea for once. No, they're out to kill them all again, and it's us against everybody, and they're going with that line of thinking again. And Dorne, yeah, that isn't going to happen in Dorne, I'm pretty confident to say. So, well, this is the start of it. This is the beginning of the season that goes, out into the dark as far as book readers and their knowledge is concerned. And it's a rocky ride to start with, and we'll see how many of you actually stick with it until the end. Next week, we're going to be discussing I am going to be discussing the second episode, which is called Home. Until then. Finally, a thank you to Pyrrha that sent me this lovely necklace from their new collection of character talismans. This is the Daenerys character talisman, which features one of the dragon eggs and the motto, "Fire cannot kill a dragon." There's also a Arya talisman and a Tyrion talisman, and these join the other licensed Game of Thrones talismans that they have since before, which include these house talismans, like the Targaryen one that I'm also wearing. And you know, I'm a bit of a dragon, so I do like to hoard these pretty things, and you know, hope to maybe show some more in the future once I get a hold of a few more for myself.